Typically, the quarterback is the most important player on any given football team. For an NFL franchise, the level of competence at the position could be the difference between Super Bowl championships and irrelevancy. The problem here is that there are very few premium Pro Bowl level quarterbacks, and once a team gets one, they're certainly not going to give them up. Well, at least most of the time. Whether it be age, injuries, another promising quarterback on the roster, or a torn relationship with the organization, sometimes these high-profile signal callers become available to the highest bidder. And in this video, we will go over every Blockbuster quarterback trade since 2000. Now before we continue, the first half of the 2024 season has flown by. Before we know it, it'll be over, and we'll be back to counting down the days to next season. While football is still among us, why not get out to a game and get tickets via SeatGeek, today's sponsor? With over 28 million downloads, SeatGeek is the #1 rated ticketing app. There are more than 70,000 events every single day available on SeatGeek, which includes concerts, other sports, festivals, and more. Plus, it's so easy using the SeatGeek app. I went to a playoff game last season and it was a total blast. They put all the tickets across the web in one place to make sure that you are getting a good deal. Every ticket is rated on a scale from 1 to 10. So look for the green dots. Green means good and red means bad. Every ticket is backed by their buyer guarantee, and I got you guys. Use my code KTO for $20 off tickets at SeatGeek. That's $20 off your first purchase with promo code KTO. Make sure to click the link in the description to download the app. In 2001, everyone in New England was celebrating the surprising rise of backup quarterback Tom Brady, except for Drew Bledsoe. The former #1 overall pick had been the starter for the Patriots for nearly a decade. He had made 3 Pro Bowls in his career and even led the team to a Super Bowl appearance back in 1996. But after getting injured in 2001 and the team winning a Super Bowl with the backup quarterback, it was clear Bledsoe was going to be traded before the next season. During the 2002 draft weekend, the Bills sent the Patriots a first-rounder for Bledsoe.
Bledsoe pump fakes, now goes to the end zone, touchdown!
The new Bills quarterback played well in year 1, achieving Pro Bowl honors. However, he struggled against his former team, getting blown out in their initial rematch, and throwing 4 interceptions in their second loss to the Patriots that season. Overall, 2002 was a good year for Bledsoe, but it was the high point of his time in Buffalo. He went on to play 3 total seasons with the Bills, before they released him in favor of first-round pick J.P. Lossman. When Bledsoe later signed with the Dallas Cowboys, he expressed bitterness with the Bills for this move, and after 2 years in Dallas, he retired. Looking at the trade results, the Bills gave up a first-round pick for a 3-year starter who made 1 Pro Bowl before being released, while the Patriots basically traded their backup quarterback for a first-rounder that eventually became Ty Warren, who was a solid starter with the Patriots for 7 seasons. I'd say the Patriots got the better end of this deal.
You know, I've never really commented a lot about this before, but, the Drew Brees, scenario really soured me a little bit because, we really wanted to get him. We had him. Circumstances.
It's like the physical, right?
Physical didn't allow us to have him on our team.
In 2005, Nick Saban had helped turn around the Dolphins into a decent team, improving their record from 4-12 to 9-7. With the team seemingly a quarterback away from being in the Super Bowl conversation, Saban went after former Chargers quarterback Drew Brees, which would have happened, but Brees failed a physical when he came to Miami, and that was the end of it. As a second option, Saban orchestrated a deal to bring in another Pro Bowl quarterback, Daunte Culpepper.
The throw, he's looking for Moss. Moss has a chance. Moss has got it. Touchdown, Vikings.
Culpepper had been the Vikings starter for 6 seasons, achieving 3 Pro Bowls, and led the league in passing yards in 2004. But quickly, the trajectory of his career flipped upside down. A rough 7-game stretch in 2005, followed by a knee injury, ended Culpepper's season early. Not only did the team immediately improve with the backup quarterback, Culpepper was also involved in the 2005 boat cruise scandal, which led to charges against Culpepper and other players that were later dropped. Culpepper and the Vikings organization had reached a breaking point, which led to the Dolphins exchanging a second-rounder for the Vikings quarterback. Before his first regular season game in Miami, Culpepper walked up to cornerback Chris Gamble during a preseason game and thanked him for injuring him. Culpepper said that if Gamble had not hit him like that, he still would have been in Minnesota. Right off the bat, things were rough in Miami. By the second game, Dolphins fans were booing Culpepper and calling for the backup. Eventually, a heated argument between Saban and Culpepper led to the quarterback's benching until his shoulder recovered, and he got more of his mobility back that he lost due to his knee injury. Overall, the season was a disaster. Saban left for Alabama following the year, and after the team signed Trent Green, Culpepper requested to be released, which the team eventually granted after a month. Culpepper played 3 more seasons, mostly struggling when he did play, then was out of the league after that. This is really random, but I wanted to mention it. So Culpepper played in the United Football League in 2010 for the Sacramento Mountain Lions. One, it's pretty weird to me to see a player of his caliber playing at my alma mater in Sac State. And second, we never see star NFL quarterbacks playing at this low of a level after a mostly great NFL career. Looking back at the trade results, the Dolphins sent a second rounder for a quarterback that ended up starting 4 total games for them. Meanwhile, the Vikings used that pick on offensive lineman Ryan Cook, who had a brief career as a starter before being a rotational backup lineman and not re-signing with the team after his rookie contract. Minnesota won this trade, although that's not saying much.
I am officially retiring from the NFL and Green Bay Packers, and I promised I wouldn't get emotional.
The Packers had a chaotic 2008 offseason. Brett Favre retired, then unretired. Then he wanted to be released, and the team at first refused to go along with these demands. Eventually, the Packers made huge news when they traded Favre to the Jets in exchange for a conditional 4th-round pick. It wasn't much, but at that point, the Packers were happy to get anything for him. And he was one of the most popular players in the league. So his departure from Green Bay and arrival in New York made all the headlines. Favre was on the cusp of turning 39. But was coming off a Pro Bowl season his final year in Green Bay, where the team reached the NFC Championship and lost in overtime. So clearly he could still play. At first, it looked like the Jets struck gold with Favre.
Bomb over the middle, at the 5, into the end zone, touchdown!
The team started 8-3, which included a 6-touchdown performance by their new starting quarterback, as well as a 5-game win streak. But Favre's play fell off a cliff in the final 5 weeks, and the team fell to 9-7, and didn't make the postseason. It was later revealed that Favre had a torn bicep tendon in his right shoulder during that final stretch of games. After the season, Favre told the Jets GM to look in a different direction in regards to quarterback, and in February, Favre retired again, before he came back once again, this time with the Vikings, which lasted 2 years before he again retired. Looking at the trade results, the conditional draft pick ended up being a 3rd rounder, which the Packers traded to the Patriots. And for that 3rd rounder, the Jets got a solid 11-game stretch before things got rough. The Packers packaged that pick with a 2nd rounder and another 3rd rounder to move up into the 1st round to acquire future All-Pro Clay Matthews. Not too much was lost on the side of the Jets in terms of draft capital, but it had to hurt for fans seeing what Favre did prior to his injury in New York.
Very rare to see 2 number 1 draft picks in a trade in any acquisition in the National Football League anymore, but we saw it on Thursday.
In 2009, the Broncos hired Patriots offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels. Once arriving, McDaniels tried to trade for Matt Castle, the quarterback he had worked with in 2008 that had a solid season in wake of Brady's injury. But the trade never happened. Plus, McDaniels pissed off Denver's current starting quarterback, Jay Cutler, who was coming off a Pro Bowl season. Adam Schefter described the situation as, quote, one of the wilder and more complex behind-the-scenes dramas the NFL had seen in any recent offseason. Castle ended up on Kansas City, and Cutler was traded to the Bears for 2 firsts, a 3rd, and Kyle Orton, the biggest haul of any player in this video so far. I'll mention Castle first really quickly. So he went to Kansas City and had 1 solid year that ended with a Pro Bowl and a rough playoff debut, then fell off after that and was released after 3 seasons with the Chiefs. They also got the final 2 starting years of Mike Vrabel's career before he retired. The Patriots turned that 2nd round pick into Patrick Chung, who had a good but injury-prone first stint with the Patriots. For the Cutler trade, things got off to a rough start in Chicago, as Cutler led the league in interceptions. However, 2010 was a step in the right direction. Cutler was an average-level starter who had brought stability to the quarterback position, which was something that the Bears desperately needed. With a solid roster, they reached the NFC Championship before Cutler got hurt in the first half and couldn't finish the game as the Bears went on to lose. This was the high point of the Cutler era in Chicago. Cutler was somewhere between a mediocre to average-level starter over the course of the next 6 seasons before the team decided to move in a different direction. They never made the playoffs with him again after the 2010 season. Looking at the trade results, the Bears did get what they were looking for in a sense, which was stability at quarterback. Cutler ranks as the Bears' all-time leader in passing yards and touchdown passes. But at the same time, Cutler never made a Pro Bowl in his time in Chicago and led the league 2 times in interceptions. They also received a 5th-round pick in that trade for Cutler, and they used it on Johnny Knox, who had a short but successful career, first as a Pro Bowl return man and then as a decent wide receiver. For Denver, they got 2.5 years out of Kyle Orton. At points, he was actually pretty decent, but it was clear he wasn't the future after a rough start to 2011. For the picks they received, they were all duds, which was part of a bunch of reasons why Josh McDaniels ended up getting fired. So ultimately, Chicago did end up getting the better end of this deal.
Donovan McNab and his mom are coming to your home.
Come on in.
And they're bringing dinner.
Can't believe these guys.
Campbell's Chunky Chicken Corn Chowder.
Throughout the 2000s, Donovan McNab was one of the most iconic quarterbacks in the NFL. Drafted 2nd overall by the Eagles in 1999, McNab made 6 Pro Bowls, started in 5 NFC championships, and played in a Super Bowl, which they lost. Entering 2009, McNab had established himself as the all-time leading passer in Eagles history and went on to make the Pro Bowl that season. But the team suffered yet another loss in the playoffs. Despite head coach Andy Reid stating that McNab would remain the starter in 2010, the Eagles surprisingly traded McNab in the offseason to their division rival, the Washington Redskins, for a 2nd-round pick and another conditional mid-round pick. Trading your Pro Bowl caliber quarterback to a rival that you play at least twice a year is a bold move. Early into the 2010 season, while the Eagles struggled to find their starting quarterback, McNab threw for over 400 yards in a loss to Houston, and then in his first game back in Philly, he led the Redskins to victory over his former team, although he did have a rough game. This win was the high point of McNab's time in Washington, as it went mostly downhill from there.
Just outside of Washington, D.C., temperature in the low 50s.
Standing at 4-4 in the rematch versus the Eagles, McNab had not been good to this point in the season, but this was his chance to get the better of his former team for a 2nd time. Instead, Michael Vick, who had established himself as Philly's new starter, lit up Washington on Monday night. It was so insane that the Eagles were up 35-0 less than 10 seconds into the 2nd quarter. McNab threw 3 picks in a blowout loss and continued to struggle the following weeks until he was relegated to 3rd stringer for the final 3 games. He was traded once again after the season. Looking at the trade results, McNab's 1 year in Washington was a complete disaster. He threw more interceptions than touchdowns for the first time in his career. Meanwhile, the Eagles turned the 2nd-round pick they got from the Redskins into Nate Allen, who became a 5-year starting safety for them and led the team in interceptions in 2014 before the Eagles chose not to re-sign him. The other pick was used in a package to trade for DeMeco Ryans, who led the team in tackles in 2013, as well as a pick swap that landed the team Nick Foles. So in a weird way, the McNab trade somehow landed them a quarterback that helped them eventually win a Super Bowl later on. But because it's so loosely connected, you can't really give much credit to the trade for that.
I knew somebody that knew Carson Palmer, and Carson Palmer had told him, "Get me out of here."
In 2011, there was a blockbuster trade involving Carson Palmer. The former #1 overall pick had an up-and-down 7-year career in Cincinnati. The breaking point between him and the Bengals organization came down to the organization not meeting Palmer's demands. Notably, he wanted 3 things. Number 1, the Bengals to retain Kitna as his backup. Number 2, hire a GM. And number 3, modernize the organization. But their stubborn owner didn't meet any of these demands. On that last point, famously, the Bengals were the only cold weather franchise to not have an indoor practice facility, which lasted all the way until 2022. In 2011, the Bengals drafted Andy Dalton as Palmer's replacement, but the organization refused to trade Palmer, so the quarterback just didn't show up to training camp, which led him to being placed on the reserve/did not report list. Midway through the 2011 season, the Raiders were having a surprise season under head coach Hugh Jackson, boasting a 4-2 record under Jason Campbell. But after an injury to Campbell, the Raiders were looking for his replacement and landed a trade with the Bengals to bring Palmer in at the price of a first and conditional second-round pick. Funny enough, Palmer, who complained about not having a GM, went to another team that also didn't have a GM at the time. For the Raiders, things were a disaster immediately. Palmer dressed for his first game versus the Chiefs, fully expecting not to be playing, then was thrust into the game in the second half and played horribly. Here's what he said after the game, quote, "I was told I was not going to play. I didn't know the offense. I also hadn't been training and working out. So it was a complete shock to me at halftime when coach told me, hey, you know we're going to get you in the third quarter." Things never got much better from that point. The team went from playoff contender to missing the postseason outright. Hugh Jackson was fired, and Palmer started one more season in Oakland before being traded to the Cardinals for basically pennies on the dollar. Then, to the dismay of Oakland fans, Palmer went on to have much more success in Arizona. Overall, this had been one of the most lopsided trades in recent memory. The Raiders got a guy who struggled with them, only to prove he could still play once he left. And the picks they gave the Bengals for Palmer turned into Dre Kirkpatrick, who eventually became a starting corner for them, and Giovanni Bernard, a solid utility back who proved to be useful in both the run and pass game. Both players helped Cincinnati regularly make the playoffs.
Does get the snap off. And Smith in the end zone, caught, touchdown.
Halfway through the 2012 season, you'd never have guessed that Alex Smith was going to be traded following the season. But that's exactly what happened. Smith had a tough start to his career. He was written off as a bust early after struggling for years in San Francisco. Then, after 6 seasons, as the team improved, he improved and developed into a competent starting quarterback. In 2012, he continued this upwards trajectory through 9 games, putting up near top of the league efficiency numbers and had the Niners looking like Super Bowl contenders. However, he got hurt, and Colin Kaepernick stole the show in a dynamic way. Kaepernick ended up leading the Niners to the Super Bowl, and despite losing, his impact rippled throughout the league. There was no way the team was going back to their former starter despite his improvements. This led to Alex Smith being shipped to Kansas City less than a month after the Super Bowl for a second-round pick and another conditional pick. For Alex Smith, this ended up being the best thing to ever happen to him. He was personally chosen to lead the Chiefs by new head coach Andy Reid, who, despite not winning a Super Bowl to that point in his career, was viewed as one of the best offensive minds in the league. Smith went on to start 5 seasons in Kansas City, reaching 3 Pro Bowls in the process, and the team with him was a regular in the postseason. During these years, Smith really found himself as an NFL player. He ran the ball way more than he ever did in San Francisco, and with much more success. He was viewed as a game manager, but a pretty high-end one, as he led the league in QB rating in 2017. But once again, Smith was replaced by the team's up-and-coming backup, and Smith was traded following a great season. Looking back at the original trade, the Chiefs got a guy who developed into a solid above-average starter for 5 years, and served as a role model to the future of their franchise in Patrick Mahomes. The Alex Smith years set the tone for what developed into the dynasty. For the Niners, their second-round pick eventually turned into a bust. The conditional pick was later traded for other picks, which never became noteworthy. The Chiefs got the better end of the deal here.
When people said you can't give up a first-round draft pick for Sam Bradford, I said, you tell me how many first-round draft picks this year are worth 4 or 5 points a game, which is what a solid quarterback is.
In a 2-year span, Sam Bradford was traded twice. In 2015, he was traded to Philly for a mid-round pick swap, Nick Foles, and a second-round pick. 1 year later, he was traded to the Vikings for a first-round pick. Looking at the one season with the Eagles, the team went 7-7 with Bradford under center, but his numbers ranked him as a below-average starter, which prompted the Eagles to make a move in the 2016 NFL Draft, and they selected Carson Wentz. Bradford remained on the team for the time being. That was until the 2016 preseason.
Tough news for Former Louisville quarterback and current Minnesota Vikings QB Teddy Bridgewater. 25 minutes into practice today, Bridgewater went down with a non-contact injury.
Coming off a Pro Bowl season and playoff appearance, Bridgewater's injury devastated the Vikings. In an act of desperation, they sent a first-round pick to the Eagles for Sam Bradford, who to that point had not lived up to his #1 overall potential due to injuries and mediocre play. However, when a team feels like they are on the cusp of a championship run, they will overpay for potential. Bradford's first season in Minnesota ended up being the best season of his career to that point. He led the league in completion percentage and produced the highest quarterback rating of his career. However, the offense was largely mediocre due to the lack of a run game and a safe but non-explosive pass game. There was some optimism though because of the records Bradford had set, despite joining the team just before the regular season. The following season, things looked very promising, but for the third time in his career, Bradford had a season end early due to a knee injury. The team ended up having success with backup Case Keenum, who helped the Vikings reach the NFC Championship. And after the season, Bradford and the team parted ways. The quarterback went on to sign with the Cardinals for what ended up being the final season of his career. Focusing on the second trade results, the Vikings sent a first-round pick on a guy who started 17 total games over 2 years. He did set a few franchise records and even led the league in completion percentage, but he was still seen as an average starter by league standards. The Eagles used that first-round pick on Derek Barnett and the conditional fourth-round pick on Josh Sweat. Barnett lasted 6.5 seasons with Philly, mostly starting during that time, and Sweat became a surprising developmental player that turned into a Pro Bowler by 2021. Philly definitely got the better end of the deal.
So there's a report out today, and we're going to talk some football today. The Browns now would trade the 12th overall pick for Jimmy Garoppolo.
In 2017, at first, it looked like the Patriots had Tom Brady's replacement in New England with Jimmy Garoppolo, as he looked really impressive in his short sample of games before getting injured. But when Brady returned, he kept playing well and publicly said that he wanted to play into his mid-40s. This led to owner Robert Kraft forcing Belichick's hand in trading their promising young backup quarterback. This led to some trade deadline madness that landed Garoppolo in San Francisco at the price of a second-round pick, which was a pretty high price for a guy who had only started 2 NFL games. Right away, Jimmy G looked like the hero the Niners had been missing. This 1-10 football team won 5 straight games with their new starting quarterback, which led him to getting a 5-year max contract worth up to $137 million. This was the largest contract in NFL history at the time. Absolutely bonkers for a guy who had only started 7 career games. After tearing his ACL in 2018, Jimmy G bounced back to help lead the Niners to a Super Bowl appearance in 2019. Despite playing an important role, this run was noteworthy because of how little they used their quarterback during the playoffs, as he famously threw just 8 passes in the NFC title game. Unfortunately, they blew a lead in the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl to the Chiefs. From there, Jimmy G sort of kept the status quo of what his career had been plagued by. He kept getting injured, and the team continued to win with or without him. Although he could run Shanahan's offense good enough, there was always questions about his ability to elevate and whether or not he was ever that good or if he was just more of a product of the system. The team felt like it was the system and decided to find his replacement in the 2021 NFL Draft. But Trey Lance got hurt, and Jimmy G retained his starting job until he got hurt again and was replaced by the surprising success of Brock Purdy. This finally gave the Niners the ability to move off Jimmy G. Looking at the trade results, the Patriots turned that second rounder into a boatload of lower draft picks that mostly did nothing outside of Damian Harris. Overall, I'd say the Niners got the better end of this deal, even though Jimmy G didn't work out in the end. He lasted 6 years in San Francisco, and despite a lot of injuries, he did help them reach 2 NFC championships and a Super Bowl, and maintained an above-average QBR throughout his time there.
Jared Goff is now a Detroit Lion in a trade that's straight out of the NBA.
The NFL world was stunned in March 2021 by one of the biggest trades of all time. For 12 years, Stafford had been the face of the Lions organization, establishing himself as the greatest quarterback in their history by a mile. But after years of getting nowhere, Detroit decided to make a bold move. the Lions sent Pro Bowler Matt Stafford to the Rams in exchange for 2 first-rounders, a third-rounder, and Jared Goff, who had also been a Pro Bowl quarterback, but just didn't have the same level of production or talent that Stafford did. Looking at the Rams side of things, they were in win-now mode and felt like they were just a quarterback away, which was evident in the torn relationship between Jared Goff and head coach Sean McVay. For the Rams, this big gamble of a trade immediately paid off.
He's going to air it out. Deep downfield. Has a man open and it's caught at the 15-yard line by Van Jefferson.
Stafford threw for over 4,800 yards and 41 touchdowns, and more importantly, led the Rams on an electric playoff run that ended with a Super Bowl victory. No matter what happened beyond this point, the Rams got exactly what they were looking for. Since then, things just haven't been the same, as the roster has gotten worse. Stafford has been up and down in the 2.5 seasons since the Super Bowl run and also got injured. For the Lions, they were in desperate need of a rebuild, and this trade helped begin that process. After a tough 2021 season, Goff surprised everybody by his Pro Bowl 2022 season, and it's only continued to get better, looking like an MVP candidate in 2024. And those picks they acquired were used in packages to acquire Jamison Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Sam Laporta. Gibbs and Laporta specifically have been huge additions to the offense, and Williams has started to come into his own in 2024 and serves as the team's deep threat. Overall, this is one of the few times we've seen such a huge blockbuster deal result in huge wins for both teams.
Normally right now I would dive into a bunch of headlines. To be honest, there isn't really much popping off. I mean, aside from the Carson Wentz is going to the Colts stuff.
In 2021, the Wentz era in Philly came to a crashing halt. The once MVP caliber quarterback had regressed into a shell of himself, and he was benched in 2020 in favor of Jalen Hurts. Wentz requested a trade following the season. Despite his struggles, he was still seen as a mega talent. In March 2021, the Colts sent a first-round pick in 2022 and a third-rounder in 2021 for the once star quarterback. In one season, Wentz was statistically impressive. However, the team's inconsistencies and heartbreaking losses were put solely on the shoulders of Wentz due to his erratic tendencies. And he also rubbed people the wrong way in the building. According to The Athletic, quote, "As for the Colts, the issues with Wentz stretched back to before the season began," one source said, and over the course of the year, some grew frustrated at what they deemed a lack of leadership, a resistance to hard coaching and reckless style of play, which had a role in several close losses this year. The Colts had such internal issues with Wentz that they dealt him off to Washington after just one season. Wentz in 2021 became the perfect example of a time when stats become deceiving, and the Commanders may have fallen victim to this just based on what they gave up for him. In one season, Wentz was pretty woeful in 7 games, and he was released after the season. In trade number 1, the Colts got one decent but turbulent season out of Wentz before getting some draft capital back for his services. The Eagles basically used these new assets as trade capital to acquire more picks, which landed them a bunch of great players. So I'd say that the Eagles got the better end of this one. For trade number 2, the Commanders got a bad 7-game stretch, and the Colts got basically a pick swap and a few third-rounders, one of which was used on Jelani Woods, who's been injured since last season, and Josh Downs, who is actually a decent receiver for them right now, as he leads the team in receptions at the time of this video. So I'd say the Colts got the better end of this one.
It kind of looks like Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson, they've had a great run, and it could be over.
In the offseason of 2022, after years of speculation, Russell Wilson was finally traded out of Seattle in a blockbuster deal to Denver. Coming off a Pro Bowl season, Wilson commanded a massive haul for his talents. The Broncos sent 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and a 5th-round pick, as well as 2 starting-level players and Drew Lock in exchange for Wilson and a 4th-round pick. How'd it go for Wilson and the Broncos? It was a nightmare. Wilson was one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL in 2022, and the Broncos went 4-11 with him under center, resulting in head coach Nat Hackett getting canned. With Sean Payton taking over in 2023, Wilson improved statistically, but had clearly been a shell of his former self. Payton and the Broncos were so ready to move on that they cut Wilson following 2023, resulting in the largest dead cap hit in NFL history. As for Seattle, this trade was a huge W. They got 6 eventual starting level players out of the deal. Plus, Wilson's former backup Geno Smith surprised everyone and actually outplayed Wilson in 2022 and 2023. A trade this lopsided would have made any GM start to hesitate on pulling the trigger for this steep of a price. Yet, somehow, this isn't even the worst trade of the 2022 offseason.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before we introduced Deshaun, I thought it was important to say that we as an organization know that this transaction has been very difficult for many people.
The Deshaun Watson trade rumors went on for months and was an ongoing storyline, packaged with all the allegations stacked up against the quarterback. Watson to the Browns was never going to happen, but because owner Jimmy Haslam fully guaranteed a $230 million contract, which had never happened to that point, it led Watson to signing with Cleveland. The trade resulted in Houston sending Shawn Watson and a 6th-round pick in exchange for a mind-boggling amount of draft capital.
I thought we had a QB. Tell me, what did we give up?
A number 1 pick this year.
And?
1st-round pick next year, and the year after that.
You gave up 3 consecutive first-rounders.
Sonny, that's our future.
The Browns sent the Texans 3 first-round picks, a 3rd-round pick, and 2 4ths. That, along with the fully guaranteed contract, meant that anything less than a Pro Bowl top 10 level quarterback who leads them on constant playoff runs would be a failure. Because this also meant it was the end of the Baker Mayfield era, the guy who helped lead the Browns to the playoffs just 1 year prior. The first season was a complete waste, as Watson was suspended for the first 11 games. And when he got in there, he was terrible. In 2023, Watson only played in 6 total games, missing most of the season with injuries. In those 6 games, he produced one of the lowest QB ratings in the NFL. In his absence, old man Joe Flacco, off the couch, lifted the Browns to a crazy run that found them in the playoffs. Flacco won Comeback Player of the Year. But because the owner was all in on Watson, the team did not re-sign Flacco and recommitted to Watson for 2024. In 7 starts, Watson was easily the worst starting quarterback in the NFL. It was so embarrassing that fans constantly booed him. The offense failed to produce a single game over 20 points with Watson under center, and Watson failed to reach 200 yards passing in a single game. Then he tore his Achilles, which resulted in some fans cheering, leading to drama between players and fans. In the week following Watson's injury, Jameis Winston led the Browns to their first win in 6 games, and also threw for 300 yards, something Watson had not done once in his time in Cleveland. So is the Watson era over? Well, it should be. However, with Jimmy Haslam calling the shots, anything is possible. So this is clearly one of the worst trades, if not the worst of all time. The Texans got to remove themselves from an alleged predator and have accumulated 7 total players from that trade, including Defensive Rookie of the Year Will Anderson Jr. and a few other starters. And even though it wasn't directly related to the trade, they got to draft CJ Stroud, clearly a better quarterback. Houston now looks like one of the best rosters in football, while the Browns continue to be one of the disaster franchises.
It is confirmed. Matthew Ryan, done deal. The Falcons are trading former NFL MVP Matt Ryan to the Colts for a 2022 3rd-round pick.
The Colts had been on the Carson Wentz roller coaster the year before, and were looking for more stable play. Despite Ryan being in his late 30s, he was still at least an average-level starter at the time of the trade. But things did not go well. Ryan had his worst season as a starting quarterback. The team went 4-7-1 with him under center, which led to Ryan being released by the team, and his eventual retirement. The final start of his career was the day the Colts gave up the largest comeback in NFL history, a terrible reminder of Ryan's saddest NFL moment. For the trade aftermath, the Falcons used that 3rd-round pick they got to acquire D'Angelo Malone, who's been a backup throughout his 3 seasons so far in Atlanta. Overall, this trade hasn't been great for either team, but the stakes were pretty low.
We have breaking news here in Kansas City, but the focus is not here for the draft. Instead, it is in New York and Green Bay, where finally, the Jets and Packers have agreed to their mega trade.
For the final blockbuster trade at the time of making this video, we have the 2023 Aaron Rodgers trade. Coincidentally, he requested to be sent to the same team as his predecessor. The trade sent Aaron Rodgers, a first and a fifth round pick, to the Jets for their 2023 first, second, and sixth round picks, along with a 2024 conditional second round pick. Year one in New York lasted a total of one drive because Rodgers tore his Achilles and missed the entire 2023 season. Now in year two, Rodgers has started the team's first 8 games, but it's not going well. The team is 3-6, fired their head coach, and Rodgers looks, well, old and slower than he used to be. At this point, it looks highly unlikely that the Jets will be a good team with Rodgers. He's not getting any younger, and the organization has a host of issues beyond just Rodgers not playing at a top 10 level. For what Green Bay got out of the deal, it's still pretty early to tell. The most important thing for them was getting rid of Rodgers to move on to Jordan Love.